Ada for wanting my parents to discipline my brother so he stops bullying me? Hi Reddit. This is my first time posting, so I apologize if my writing feels awkward. I've always been more of a reader than a writer, but I really need some advice, and I thought this might be the best place to turn. My situation has been weighing heavily on me for quite some time now, and I don't know what to do about it anymore. So here's my story. I'm a 20-year-old woman, and my younger brother, who is 17, has been the source of so much frustration and mental anguish for me that I've reached my breaking point. The main issue is that my brother has never been held accountable for his actions. He's never truly faced the consequences of the things he does wrong. Whether it's something small or something bigger, he has a knack for turning things around in his favor. Whenever my parents attempt to discipline him, he immediately starts pouting, using guilt as a weapon. Somehow, it always works. He manages to manipulate them into feeling sorry for him, and the issue just gets swept under the rug. This behavior isn't new, it's been happening for years now. But over the past couple of years, it has intensified. He's become relentless. Whenever we argue or disagree about something, and I try to walk away to cool down or avoid further confrontation, he follows me. He taunts me, belittles me, and completely ignores the boundaries I've set for myself. It doesn't matter how many times I've told him to stop. It doesn't matter how many times I've asked him to respect my space. He doesn't listen. It's like he thrives on getting a reaction out of me, and the more I resist, the more determined he becomes. For the past 8 months, I've been attending college, which has been both a blessing and a curse. My college is only in the next town over, so I have the ability to come home on weekends, which I do as often as possible. At first, I thought this arrangement would give me some breathing room. I thought it would give me a chance to escape the chaos at home and focus on my studies. And to some extent, it has. But the weekends, which I used to look forward to, have started to feel like another source of stress. You see, like most college students, my diet at school isn't great. I survive on canned and freeze-dried meals most of the time, and I'm constantly looking for the cheapest options to save money. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not nutritious, but it's all I can manage right now. So when I come home, it's such a relief to have access to fresh food again. My parents are really sweet in that regard. They always make sure to stock up on some of my favorite snacks when they know I'm coming home. Fresh fruit, candy, or just little treats that remind me of home. It's one of the few things I can count on to brighten my weekends. But even this small comfort has started to be overshadowed by my brother's behavior. It's like he's incapable of sharing or respecting that these snacks are meant for me. Every single time, without fail, he manages to get to them before I do. I can't tell you how many times I've come home, excited to enjoy something my parents specifically got for me, only to find it already gone. And it's not like I'm unreasonable. I wouldn't mind sharing if he just asked first. But he doesn't. He just takes whatever he wants, whenever he wants, without a second thought. It's infuriating, but more than that, it's disheartening. I've tried to make it clear that I don't want him eating the snacks that are meant for me, especially since I don't get to come home every weekend. The weather where we live is harsh, with heavy snowfall that often makes the roads too dangerous to travel. So when I do make it home, it's all the more disappointing to find that the things I was looking forward to have already been devoured by him. I've even started writing my name on the food to make it clear that it's not for him. But it doesn't matter. He eats it anyway, and I'm left feeling like my presence in my own home doesn't matter. This might seem like such a small, petty thing to get upset about, just some snacks, right? But it's not just about the food. It's about the principle of it. It's about the complete lack of respect for me as an individual. It's about the way he continues to cross boundaries and the way my parents enable him. And it's not just about food, either. This is just one example of a much larger pattern. My brother has been conditioned to believe that he can do whatever he wants, and there will be no consequences. He gets everything handed to him on a silver platter, whether it's a new toy or a new game for his Switch. He doesn't ask. He doesn't compromise. He just takes and takes and takes. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells. I've tried so hard to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, but it doesn't seem to matter. Even when I don't fight back, even when I just walk away and let my parents handle it, I'm the one who ends up being yelled at. It's like no matter what I do, I can't win. I know this might sound like just another sibling argument, but it's affecting me on a much deeper level. It's not just about the food or the arguments. It's about the way I feel completely disregarded and disrespected in my own home. It's about the way I've started to dread going home, even though it used to be the one thing I looked forward to during my stressful weeks at college. It's about the way I feel like my feelings don't matter, like my voice doesn't matter. This is where I'm at right now. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I've tried everything, and nothing works. I'm exhausted, mentally and emotionally. And I just need some advice. What should I do? How do I handle this? How do I protect my boundaries and my peace without alienating my family even further? If you've made it this far, thank you for reading. I just needed to get this off my chest. Lately, I've been noticing a pattern that has made coming home less and less enjoyable. My parents, trying to make me feel welcome and comforted, will stock the fridge with a few of my favorite snacks or fresh fruit, things I can't afford or don't have access to at college. At first, it feels like a small piece of home that I can hold onto in the whirlwind of stress and responsibility that comes with being a student. But no matter how much effort my parents put into ensuring I have something special waiting for me, it's always the same outcome. I'll eat a little bit of whatever they bought, and before I know it, it's gone. Disappeared. Vanished without a trace. It didn't take me long to realize who the culprit was. My brother, of course. And here's the thing, I wouldn't even mind sharing if he simply asked first. I understand he's a teenager and growing, and he's probably perpetually hungry. I get that. But what gets under my skin is the complete lack of respect for boundaries. Writing my name on the food, labeling it clearly, has become a futile exercise. He doesn't care. He doesn't even try to hide it anymore. He takes what he wants, as if he's entitled to it, and leaves nothing for me. This wouldn't be as big of an issue if I were able to come home every weekend. But because of the heavy snow and treacherous roads where we live, there are stretches of time when I'm unable to make the trip back. During those weekends, I'm stuck at school, eating my usual diet of canned soup and instant noodles, while my brother is at home, raiding the pantry and fridge. By the time I do manage to get home, the snacks or food my parents bought for me are already gone, leaving me with nothing but frustration. It's a vicious cycle that has started to make me dread going home, not because of the snow or the long drive, but because I know exactly what's waiting for me: more disappointment. What makes it even harder to swallow is the hypocrisy. Growing up, I was constantly reminded not to be selfish with food. Don't eat all of it, my parents would say. Save some for everyone else. If I dared to take more than my fair share or forget to ask before grabbing something, I'd face swift consequences. But my brother? He gets away with everything. There are no rules for him. It's like he's operating on a completely different set of standards, and my parents enable it. They excuse his behavior, telling me to let it go, to not make a big deal out of it, to stop picking on him. It's maddening. Now, on to today's incident, which has left me feeling more upset than usual. With a big exam looming on Monday, my parents had gone out of their way to buy me some strawberries, a small gesture to help me feel supported and to give me something to look forward to during this stressful time. I was genuinely excited about it. Strawberries are my favorite, and I hadn't had any in weeks. Just knowing they were waiting for me in the fridge gave me a small sense of comfort. When I went to the kitchen to make lunch, I saw my brother heading to the fridge. He pulled out the container of strawberries, grabbed a massive bowl, and began filling it to the brim. Mind you, my father had bought 2 containers just the day before, and my brother had already eaten one of them entirely on his own. I was frustrated but tried to handle the situation calmly. I told him, kindly, to save some for me because I really wanted some, especially since the container had my name on it. As I said this, my mother, who was sitting at the dining room table eating her lunch, shot me a look that made my stomach drop. It was the kind of look that made me feel like I had just committed some unthinkable crime. Then, with a tone dripping with sarcasm and annoyance, she told me to stop pestering my brother and to mind my own business. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How was this my fault? How was it pestering to simply ask for something that was clearly meant for me? I reminded her of what she used to tell me when I was younger: don't eat everything. Save some for everyone else. I thought this would make her see the unfairness of the situation, but instead, she dismissed me entirely. She told me I had no right to tell him what he could or couldn't eat, completely ignoring the fact that he wasn't just taking a few strawberries, he was on his way to eating all of them. I tried to explain how it wasn't fair, how I was just asking for a little bit of consideration, but she cut me off with a condescending boo-hoo. Go cry about it. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I was stunned. I wasn't being unreasonable. I wasn't asking for much. I just wanted a few strawberries, something small to help me feel a little less overwhelmed with everything going on in my life. But instead of support, I was met with ridicule. It felt like my feelings didn't matter at all, like I was the problem for even bringing it up. Later in the evening, I decided to let it go. Or at least, I tried to. I told myself it wasn't worth the mental energy, that I needed to focus on my exam and not let this ruin my weekend. But as I walked into the living room to see what my family was doing, I caught sight of my brother with another massive bowl of strawberries. This time, he wasn't even trying to hide his smugness. He gave me a look that said, I won, and there's nothing you can do about it. Then, with that infuriating smirk still plastered on his face, he walked off to his room, leaving me standing there, seething. I didn't tell my parents that he ate the rest of the strawberries. What was the point? They wouldn't care. If anything, they'd probably find a way to make me feel bad for even bringing it up. But inside, I was fuming. It's not just about the strawberries. It's about everything. The way he's allowed to walk all over me, the way my parents refuse to hold him accountable, the way I'm made to feel like I'm the one in the wrong for standing up for myself. It's exhausting. I feel like no matter what I do, I can't win. This whole situation might seem trivial on the surface, just a sibling squabble over food. But it's not just about the food. It's about the principle of it. It's about respect, or the lack thereof. It's about the way my feelings are constantly invalidated, the way my boundaries are ignored, the way I'm treated like I don't matter. And honestly, it's starting to take a toll on me. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Later that evening, I sat alone in my room, trying to focus on my exam prep, but my thoughts were a mess. The incident with the strawberries had triggered something deeper than just frustration over food. It felt like every unresolved issue, every moment of unfairness, every time my feelings had been dismissed or invalidated had come rushing to the surface all at once. I wanted to let it go, to chalk it up as just another petty sibling squabble, but I couldn't. It wasn't about the strawberries anymore, it was about the constant pattern of disrespect, the way my voice never seemed to matter in this house, the way my boundaries were repeatedly trampled over. I replayed the scene in my head, the smug look on my brother's face as he dumped the rest of the strawberries into his bowl, the way my mother had brushed off my concerns earlier with that condescending boo-hoo, go cry about it. It was like no one cared how I felt, no one even tried to understand. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my frustration, walked away from arguments, and tried to be the bigger person, only to end up feeling smaller and smaller in my own home. This wasn't a new feeling, but it was hitting me harder than ever. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. My brother's voice was loud and carefree, like someone who had never faced a single consequence in his life. I stayed in bed for a while, debating whether it was even worth getting up. Part of me wanted to stay hidden away, to avoid the inevitable tension that came with being around my family. But another part of me, one that I didn't even fully recognize, felt a growing sense of defiance. I was tired of being dismissed, tired of being the one who always had to back down. Maybe it was time to stop walking away. When I finally went downstairs, I found my brother sitting at the table, devouring a massive plate of pancakes. My mom was standing at the stove, making more, and my dad was reading the newspaper, completely oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. I sat down at the table, trying to decide if I should bring up what had happened the night before. My brother didn't even look up as I sat down. If anything, he seemed to take up even more space, like he was asserting his dominance over the table itself. "Morning," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Morning," my mom replied, her tone curt and clipped. It was clear she was still annoyed with me for the way I'd pestered my brother about the strawberries. My dad muttered a distracted good morning without looking up from his paper. My brother, of course, didn't say anything. He just kept eating, completely unbothered. I poured myself a cup of coffee and tried to focus on the day ahead. I had a full schedule of studying to do, and I needed to stay calm and focused. But the longer I sat there, the more the tension in the room seemed to grow. It wasn't just in my head, I could feel it, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. My brother's smugness, my mom's indifference, my dad's obliviousness, it all felt so suffocating. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I set my coffee cup down a little harder than I meant to, and the sound echoed through the quiet kitchen. "Can we talk about what happened yesterday?" I said, looking directly at my mom. She turned around from the stove, her expression already defensive. "What is there to talk about?" she said, her tone sharp. "You made a big deal out of nothing, as usual." "It's not nothing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about respect. I don't think it's fair that my food gets eaten every time I come home, especially when it's something you specifically got for me. I'm not asking for much, I just want my boundaries to be respected." "Boundaries?" she repeated, like the word itself was offensive. "You're talking about boundaries over some strawberries." "It's not just about the strawberries," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "It's about how this keeps happening. It's about how my feelings are always dismissed. Every time I try to stand up for myself, I'm the one who gets blamed, while I gestured to my brother, gets away with everything." At this point, my brother finally looked up from his plate, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're so dramatic," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's just food. Get over it." His words felt like a slap in the face. "It's easy for you to say that when you're the one who always gets what he wants," I shot back. "You never have to think about anyone else because mom and dad let you do whatever you want." "That's enough," my mom said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to you attack your brother." "I'm not attacking him," I said, my frustration boiling over. "I'm pointing out a pattern. He takes whatever he wants, and no one holds him accountable. Meanwhile, I'm expected to just grin and bear it. How is that fair?" My dad finally put down his newspaper, looking up at me with a frown. "Let's not turn this into a big argument," he said. "We're a family. We should be supporting each other, not fighting over petty things." "It's not petty to me," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not petty to feel like my feelings don't matter in my own home." For a moment, there was silence. My mom turned back to the stove, clearly done with the conversation. My dad picked up his newspaper again, retreating into his usual bubble of avoidance. My brother, still smirking, got up from the table and walked out of the room, leaving his empty plate behind for someone else to clean up. I sat there, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. I had finally spoken up, but it felt like it didn't make a difference. My words had fallen on deaf ears, just like they always did. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to release the overwhelming weight of it all. But instead, I just sat there, staring into my coffee cup, feeling utterly defeated. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the day in my mind. I kept thinking about what I could have said differently, what I could have done to make them understand. But no matter how many scenarios I imagined, the outcome was always the same. They didn't care. They didn't want to listen. And I was left feeling like a stranger in my own family. As the snow fell outside my window, I made a silent promise to myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. And if my family wasn't willing to respect my boundaries, then maybe it was time for me to start prioritizing myself, even if it meant creating some distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of determination. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that I deserved better and I was going to fight for it, no matter what. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that had been building inside me for so long. My family had dismissed me yet again, my boundaries had been crossed yet again, and I felt like a ghost in my own home. I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, and even physically. I'd been carrying this resentment and frustration for years, and now it was starting to seep into every aspect of my life. I couldn't focus on my studies, I felt on edge whenever I came home, and worst of all, I was starting to doubt myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I overreacting about the strawberries and everything else? I replayed the events in my mind over and over, trying to find where I might have gone wrong. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. It wasn't just about the strawberries. It wasn't just about the food or the toys or the games. It was about respect or the complete lack of it. And it wasn't just my brother's fault. My parents had enabled this behavior for so long that it had become the norm. He could do whatever he wanted, and I was expected to either accept it or be labeled as the problem. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was racing, and I felt this overwhelming need to do something, anything to regain control of my life. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't change my brother's behavior, and I couldn't force my parents to see things from my perspective. But I could change how I reacted to it. I could stop letting their dismissiveness and favoritism dictate my self-worth. I could stop walking on eggshells and start setting firm boundaries, even if they didn't like it. The next morning, I woke up early and started packing my things. It wasn't an angry, dramatic gesture. I wasn't storming out of the house or making a big scene. But I realized that I needed some space to breathe, to focus on myself without the constant tension of my family weighing me down. I was only staying for the weekend anyway, and I decided to leave earlier than planned. As I packed, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of guilt. Leaving felt like a small act of rebellion, but it also felt necessary. When I went downstairs, my mom noticed my suitcase immediately. "You're leaving already?" she asked, her voice tinged with surprise. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "I have a lot of studying to do, and I think it'll be easier for me to focus back at school." She didn't argue with me, but I could tell she was annoyed. My dad barely looked up from his newspaper, and my brother didn't seem to notice or care. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, I was choosing myself over their expectations. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. Back at school, I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the lingering frustration and sadness. I focused on my upcoming exam, but the weight of everything that had happened still hung over me. I decided to talk to a counselor on campus, not just about the situation with my family, but about everything I'd been feeling. It wasn't easy to open up, but it felt good to finally have someone listen to me without judgment or dismissal. Through those sessions, I started to unpack a lot of the baggage I'd been carrying for years. I realized that my frustration with my brother wasn't just about his behavior, it was about how his actions made me feel invisible and unimportant. I realized that my anger toward my parents wasn't just about their favoritism, it was about the lack of support and validation I so desperately needed from them. And I realized that I had been prioritizing keeping the peace over my own mental health for far too long. The counselor helped me come up with strategies to set boundaries more effectively and to communicate my feelings in a way that didn't escalate into conflict. But more importantly, they helped me see that I wasn't responsible for fixing my family's dynamics. I couldn't force my brother to change, and I couldn't make my parents see things from my perspective. All I could do was take care of myself and protect my own well-being. Over the next few weeks, I started to feel a shift in myself. I became more intentional about how I spent my time and energy. When I visited home, I set clear limits on what I was willing to tolerate. If my brother started to cross my boundaries, I calmly but firmly told him to stop, and if he didn't, I walked away without engaging further. When my parents dismissed my concerns, I didn't argue, I simply stated my feelings and let it be. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't magically fix everything, but it gave me a sense of control that I hadn't felt in years. One weekend, I decided not to go home at all. Instead, I stayed at school, treated myself to a nice dinner, and spent the weekend relaxing and doing things that made me happy. It felt strange at first, like I was breaking some unspoken rule by not going home, but it also felt freeing. I realized that I didn't have to subject myself to that toxic environment if it wasn't good for me. I had a choice, and I was finally starting to exercise it. As time went on, I noticed small changes in how my family interacted with me. My parents started to take me more seriously when I spoke up, and my brother, though still infuriating at times, seemed to test my boundaries a little less often. I don't think they had a sudden epiphany or anything, but I think they started to see that I wasn't going to play the same role I always had. I wasn't going to be the quiet, compliant daughter who let everything slide. I was standing up for myself, and they had to adjust to that. By the end of the semester, I felt like a different person. I was still the same me, still navigating the challenges of college, still dealing with the occasional family drama, but I felt stronger. I felt more in control of my own life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The situation with my family wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But I had learned how to prioritize myself, how to set boundaries, and how to protect my mental health. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. Looking back, I don't regret speaking up about the strawberries or any of the other things that had bothered me over the years. Those moments of frustration and conflict were what pushed me to finally take a stand and start prioritizing myself. And while I still have a long way to go, I'm proud of how far I've come. For anyone reading this who might be dealing with similar struggles, my advice is this: your feelings are valid, your boundaries matter, and it's okay to put yourself first. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to stand up for yourself, but it's also the most important. You deserve respect, and you deserve to be heard. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.